Before we unlock the classified files of this operation and step into the shadows of a city that never sleeps, please make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. We are exposing the machinery of intelligence operations that governments try to keep buried, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The date was April 14th, 1988. The location was a sprawling labyrinthine souk in the heart of a hostile Arab capital, a city where the walls had ears and the air smelled of cumin, diesel, and latent danger. For 3 operatives of the Mossad Caesarea unit, this market was not a place of commerce. It was a theater of operations, a high-stakes stage where a single missed cue meant the final curtain. They were operating under the legend of European archaeologists and antiquities dealers. It was a cover that had taken 2 years to build, layer by painstaking layer. It allowed them to move through the city with a plausible excuse, documenting old structures while secretly mapping the movement of a high-value target known only by the code name, the Chemist. Avner, the team leader, stood by a stall selling brass lamps. He was a man who had mastered the art of being invisible while standing in plain sight. He wore a linen suit that was slightly rumpled, the uniform of a man too obsessed with history to care about laundry. But beneath the linen, his muscles were coiled like springs. His eyes, hidden behind dust-coated sunglasses, were not looking at the lamps. They were scanning the perimeter, checking for the telltale signs of surveillance. The man reading a newspaper for too long, the woman with the heavy basket who never seemed to buy anything, the car idling with no driver. 10 meters away, Sarah, the communications specialist, was haggling over the price of a rug. She was the heart of the operation, the one who encoded the bursts of data sent back to Tel Aviv. Her cover was that of Avner's younger, more impulsive business partner. In reality, she was a cold logician who could assemble a high-frequency transmitter in the dark in under 3 minutes. The third member, Eli, was the perimeter guard. He was positioned near the chaotic entrance of the souk, leaning against a tea shop wall, sipping a glass of mint tea that had gone cold an hour ago. The mission was entering its critical phase. Intelligence had confirmed that the Chemist was planning to transfer a shipment of advanced guidance systems to a proxy militia within 48 hours. The team needed to plant a listening device in his vehicle before that transfer happened. The tension was a physical weight, a static charge building in the dry air. Then, the anomaly occurred. It didn't start with sirens or the screech of tires. It started small, a ripple in the crowd. The ambient noise of the market, the shouting vendors and haggling customers, suddenly shifted in pitch. A child, no older than 10, burst through the dense crowd. He was barefoot, his clothes dusted with the white chalk of the local construction sites. He wasn't playing. He was running with the desperate, lung-burning speed of someone delivering news that could not wait. He sprinted past Eli, weaving through the legs of pedestrians. He knocked over a basket of lemons near Sarah, and as he ran, he screamed a phrase in the local dialect that cut through the noise like a razor. "They found the Safehouse. The soldiers found the house with the radio." Avner froze. His hand, reaching for a brass lamp, stopped in midair. Sarah's smile, practiced and charming for the rug merchant, evaporated instantly. Eli, at the entrance, stiffened, his hand drifting instinctively toward the concealed weapon at the small of his back. Time seemed to dilute, stretching a single second into an eternity. The agents were paralyzed by a cognitive dissonance that intelligence operatives fear more than anything. The collision of their secret reality with the public world. The house with the radio. It was a specific detail. Too specific. In a city of millions, a child was shouting about the one thing that could get them all eliminated. The question hammered in Avner's mind. Was it their safe house? Had the painstaking legend they built for 2 years crumbled while they were buying lamps? Or was this a trap, a psychological trigger pulled by the local counterintelligence to see who would flinch? For 3 seconds, the Mossad agents stood like statues in the river of humanity, waiting to see if the next sound they heard would be the market returning to normal, or the metallic slide of a pistol being racked behind their heads. To understand the terror of that moment in the market, we must understand the architecture of the trap they had built for themselves. This was Operation Glass Spider, a mission authorized at the highest levels of the Israeli government. The target, the Chemist, was not merely a soldier. He was a logistical genius who had turned the procurement of illicit technology into an art form. The chemist operated out of a heavily guarded villa in the diplomatic quarter, a zone impenetrable to standard surveillance. He was a ghost. He didn't use telephones for sensitive business. He didn't trust couriers. He conducted his business face-to-face, often in the chaotic public spaces of the city where he believed he could spot a tail. Mossad had decided that the only way to neutralize the threat he posed was to get inside his inner circle's logistics network. And to do that, they needed a base of operations within the city itself, a safe house that could serve as a listening post, a dormitory, and an armory. Avner and Sarah had rented a flat in a middle-class neighborhood, an area populated by merchants, teachers, and low-level bureaucrats. It was the kind of place where neighbors knew each other's business, where privacy was a luxury and curiosity was a currency. Their legend was watertight. They were the Vanderbergs, a Dutch-German duo dealing in restoration and export. They paid their rent on time, always in cash. They complained about the heat. They bought bread from the local bakery and smiled at the children playing soccer in the alley. But inside the apartment, the reality was starkly different. The spare bedroom was a technological fortress. Behind a false wall in the closet sat a high-frequency burst transmitter, capable of compressing detailed reports into a screech of static lasting less than a second, too short for standard direction-finding equipment to triangulate. Under the floorboards in the kitchen, wrapped in oilcloth and plastic, lay the tools of their true trade: silent pistols, small amounts of high-grade plastic explosives for emergency lock-breaking, and stacks of false passports for 4 different nationalities. The most dangerous item in the house, however, was not a weapon. It was a map. A detailed, hand-drawn schematic of the city's underground utility tunnels, which the chemist used to move sensitive materials without being seen by satellites. If the local security services, the Mukhabarat, found that map, there would be no trial, there would be no diplomatic expulsion, there would only be a dark cell and a very quiet end. For 2 years, they had lived on the razor's edge. Every knock at the door spiked their adrenaline. Every prolonged glance from a shopkeeper felt like an interrogation. They were living in a state of operational paranoia, a necessary psychological condition where every variable is treated as a potential threat. And they had been careful. They practiced strict radio silence during daylight hours. They entered and left the apartment at irregular times. They never threw away trash that could identify them. They burned receipts and sensitive notes in a metal bucket on the roof, mixing the ashes with water and flushing them away. But intelligence work is a game of probabilities. You can reduce the risk, but you can never eliminate it. There is always the chaotic variable, the broken pipe that brings a plumber you didn't vet, the nosy neighbor who stays up too late, or the child who sees something he shouldn't. When the boy in the market screamed about the house with the radio, it struck at the deepest fear of the deep cover agent. The fear that the environment itself has turned against you, that the city you are trying to navigate has an immune system, and it has identified you as the virus. Back in the market, the echo of the child's shout was fading, but the ripple effect was expanding. Shopkeepers were stepping out of their stalls, murmuring to one another. The word radio in this country was charged with danger. It implied espionage, foreign interference, or internal dissent. Possession of unauthorized transmission equipment was a capital offense. Avner, standing by the brass lamps, forced his body to unlock. His training kicked in, the gray man protocol. When threatened, do not run, do not freeze for too long, do not react dramatically, become boring, become part of the background. He slowly picked up the lamp he had been reaching for. He turned it over in his hands, inspecting the base, acting as though the shouting child was a mere annoyance, a disruption to his shopping. But his mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour. He caught Sarah's eye across the aisle. A micro-expression passed between them. A slight tightening of the jaw, a flicker of the eyelids. It was a silent conversation developed over years of working together. Did you hear that? Yes. Is it us? I don't know. Eli at the perimeter was the first to move. He pushed off the wall, leaving his tea unfinished. He didn't look at his teammates. He began to drift through the crowd, moving parallel to the child's path, trying to see where the boy was going, who he was running to. The boy had stopped at a falafel stand near the center of the souk. He was breathless, surrounded by a group of older men. laborers and drivers. He was gesturing wildly, pointing toward the northern district. "The soldiers!" the boy gasped, loud enough for Avner to hear as he drifted closer. "They brought the trucks. They are breaking the walls. They found the wires in the roof." The northern district. Avner felt a cold wash of relief, followed instantly by a new spike of anxiety. Their safe house was in the western district. The boy wasn't talking about their apartment, but the relief was short-lived. Wires in the roof implied a specific type of concealment. If the Mukhabarat was raiding a house in the north, it meant they were conducting a sweep. They were looking for transmitters, and if they were looking, it meant they knew someone was broadcasting. The chemist's security apparatus was not sophisticated, but his Russian advisors were. They had likely brought in new direction-finding trucks, mobile units that drove through neighborhoods, scanning for the telltale magnetic signature of spy gear. Avner placed the lamp down gently. He didn't buy it. He signaled Sarah with a subtle adjustment of his collar, the sign for abort regroup. They couldn't go back to the safe house, not yet. If there was a sweep happening in the north, the west could be next. Or worse, the raid in the north could be a diversion, a way to flush out other cells by making them panic and break cover. The three agents dissolved into the crowd, moving separately but sharing a destination. They were heading for their cool-down location, a crowded public park 3 miles away, where they could talk without walls to confine them. As Avner walked away from the market, the sounds of the city seemed to change. The laughter and haggling sounded sinister. The wail of a distant siren wasn't just background noise anymore. It was a predator's call. The child's voice echoed in his head. They hadn't been found, not yet, but the hunt was on. The park was a dusty expanse of yellow grass and tired palm trees, filled with families seeking respite from the afternoon heat. It was the perfect place for a clandestine meeting. In the open, surveillance requires closeness, and in an empty field, no one can get close without being seen. Avner sat on a wooden bench, pretending to read a French newspaper. Sarah arrived 10 minutes later, sitting on the grass nearby, ostensibly watching a group of pigeons. Eli remained on the perimeter, circling the park, ensuring they hadn't been followed from the souk. "Northern District," Avner said quietly, not looking at Sarah. "That's sectors 4 and 5, far from us. Too close for comfort," Sarah replied, her voice low. "If they found a radio, it means they have the mobile scanners active. The Russians supplied them with the R-300 units. They can pick up a burst transmission if they are within 2 blocks. We broadcast last night," Avner said. "The confirmation for the operation. It was a 3-second burst," Sarah argued. "Even with the R-300, they would need to be parked outside our building to get a fix. Or," Avner said, turning a page of the newspaper, "we have a leak. Not a technical one, a human one." This was the shadow that always hung over the Caesarea unit. Technical failure was rare. Human error was common. But betrayal? That was the variable that kept case officers awake at night. The team ran through the possibilities. Had the landlord noticed the extra power consumption? Had the antiquities cover worn thin? Or was there another player in the city? Maybe the boy was a plant. Eli's voice came over their localized, short-range earpieces. A risky piece of tech to use, but necessary now. Maybe they wanted to see who would run. "We didn't run," Avner said. "We shopped. We froze," Sarah corrected. "For 2 seconds, we were statues. A trained observer would have seen it. We have to assume the safe house is compromised until proven otherwise," Avner decided. "We go to Protocol Black. No return to the apartment for 24 hours. We use the emergency caches for cash and weapons. We sleep in the secondary hotels." "And the equipment?" Sarah asked. "The map, the codes." "If they raid the apartment," Avner said grimly, "the charges are set to blow the false wall. It will look like a gas leak. We lose the gear, but we keep the secret. But we lose the operation," Sarah whispered. "The transfer is in 48 hours. If we can't track the chemist, he moves the guidance systems. And once they are in the hands of the militia, we can't stop them from being used." The dilemma was brutal. To prioritize their own safety meant failing the mission. To prioritize the mission meant risking capture and exposure of the entire network. "We need to know what happened in the north," Avner said. "We need confirmation. Was it a spy ring, a dissident group, or a false alarm?" "I can find out," Eli said. "I have a contact near the police district, a tea house owner who hears things." "It's dangerous, Eli," Avner warned. "Everything is dangerous," Eli replied. "But walking away now ensures failure. I'll go." Eli moved through the city as the sun began to set, painting the dusty buildings in shades of violet and bruised orange. He was the muscle of the team, but that description did a disservice to his skills. He was a chameleon, capable of blending into the rougher edges of the city. He had shed his tourist guise and now wore the work clothes of a mechanic, grease-stained trousers and a faded shirt. The tea house was located in a narrow alleyway behind the central bus station. It was a place of smoke and shadows, where men played backgammon with aggressive snaps of their wrists and discussed politics in hushed metaphors. The owner, a man named Walid, was not an asset in the formal sense. He wasn't on the payroll. He was what intelligence agencies call a witting friend, someone who knew Eli was more than he seemed, but didn't ask specifically who he worked for, as long as the tips were heavy and in hard currency. Eli ordered a coffee and sat in the back. Walid approached, wiping the table with a rag that had seen better decades. "The city is nervous tonight, my friend," Walid murmured. "I heard shouting in the market," Eli said, keeping his voice indifferent. "Something about soldiers in the north." Walid nodded, leaning in closer. "A raid. Big one. They surrounded a building near the old rail yard." "Smugglers?" Eli suggested. Walid shook his head. "Spies, or so they say. But the neighborhood says something else." "What do they say?" "They say the soldiers found nothing," Walid whispered. "They tore the roof off. They broke the floors. They were looking for a machine, a magic box that speaks to the sky. But the family living there, just a school teacher and his wife, they took them anyway." Eli felt a knot tighten in his stomach. "So, a mistake? Or a message?" Walid said. "The teacher, he was known to speak loudly about the government. Maybe the radio was just the excuse. But the soldiers, they were angry. They were shouting about signals and interference. They are scared of something, my friend. When the government is scared, the people bleed." Eli left a stack of bills under the coffee cup and slipped out into the night. The intelligence was vital. It confirmed two things. First, the Mukhabarat was actively hunting for transmitters, likely detecting the same burst signals Sarah had been sending. Second, their direction-finding capabilities were imprecise. They had hit the wrong house. This was a double-edged sword. It meant the team was safe for the moment. The house with the radio the child screamed about wasn't theirs. But it also meant the enemy was aggressive, hitting targets based on vague data. It was only a matter of time before the scanners triangulated the correct vector and led the soldiers to the apartment in the west. They were playing Russian roulette, and the cylinder was spinning. While the team navigated the paranoia of the streets, their target, the chemist, was making his move. Brigadier General Hassan al-Tikriti, the chemist, was a man of precision. He did not trust the chaotic nature of the city, yet he was forced to operate within it. He sat in the back of a black Mercedes, moving through the diplomatic quarter. He was not aware of the Israeli team specifically, but he was aware of the eyes upon him. He knew that the guidance systems he was selling, advanced gyroscopes capable of turning dumb rockets into precision weapons, were coveted by militias and feared by neighboring states. "The raid in the north?" the chemist asked his driver, a cavernous man with a scar running down his neck. "Did they find the source?" "Negative, General," the driver replied. "Just a teacher, no equipment." The chemist frowned. He tapped his fingers on the leather armrest. "The signal interference on our encrypted channels has increased in the last week. Someone is listening, or trying to." "The Russians say it is atmospheric," the driver offered. "The Russians are lazy," the chemist snapped. "It is human. It is a localized transmission. Someone is inside the perimeter." He made a decision then, a tactical shift that would throw the Mossad team's plan into chaos. "Change the schedule," the chemist ordered. "The transfer happens tonight, not in 48 hours. Tonight. We use the distraction of the raid in the north. While everyone is looking at the chaos there, we will move the goods through the southern checkpoint." It was a brilliant, instinctive counter-move. By accelerating the timeline, he rendered the Mossad's intel obsolete. The window of opportunity wasn't closing, it was being slammed shut. Avner, Sarah, and Eli regrouped in a safe house that wasn't a house at all. It was a storage locker in an industrial park on the edge of the city, rented under a shell company. It smelled of oil and dry rot. Eli relayed Walid's information. They missed, but they are hunting active signals. Sarah was pacing the small space. If they missed, they'll recalibrate. They'll widen the bandwidth. But that's not the worst part. She pointed to a portable scanner she had set up on a crate. It was passively monitoring the military frequencies used by the chemist's detail. The chatter has spiked, she said. Code words involved with movement and immediate execution. They aren't waiting. They're moving the package tonight. The room went silent. The plan had been to plant a bug, track the shipment, and then interdict it in the desert where there were no civilians. If the shipment moved tonight, inside the city, they had no time to plant the device. We have to intercept it visually, Avner said. We have to get eyes on the convoy. And then what? Eli asked. We can't engage a military convoy in the middle of the capital. We have pistols, they have assault rifles and armored escorts. We don't engage, Avner said, his mind shifting into tactical overdrive. We sabotage. If we can't stop them from leaving, we have to make sure they don't get far. The plan was madness. It required them to infiltrate the loading zone, a warehouse near the southern highway, and disable the transport vehicle without being seen. It's a suicide run, Eli said, stating the fact without emotion. The alternative, Avner replied, is allowing those guidance systems to reach the border. If they do, they will be raining down on our cities within a month. We are the only ones here. There is no backup. There is no cavalry. He looked at his team. They were tired, dusty, and frightened, but the fear had crystallized into a cold resolve. We go, Sarah said, but we need the gear from the apartment. The safe house, the one they had abandoned because of a child's scream. To get the tools for the sabotage, delayed fuse magnetic mines, they had to go back into the danger zone. Returning to the apartment felt like walking into a tomb. The street was quiet, deceptively so. Avner and Eli approached from the alley, moving through the shadows, while Sarah kept watch from a rooftop 2 buildings away. They entered the building through the service entrance. The stairwell smelled of boiled cabbage and dust. They moved silently, checking for the microscopic threads they had placed on the doorframe, hairs and dust bunnies arranged in a specific pattern. The threads were intact. No one had entered. They slipped inside. The air in the apartment was stale. It felt like a museum of a life that didn't exist. The half-finished cup of coffee on the table, the book left open on the sofa. Fast, Avner whispered. They went to the kitchen. Eli pried up the floorboard. The cash was there. The magnetic mines, looking like innocuous blocks of metal, were wrapped in velvet. As they packed the gear, Sarah's voice crackled in their ears. Movement, street level, black sedan, no lights. Avner froze. Mukhabarat? Unmarked, Sarah whispered. 2 men. They're looking at the building numbers. The child in the market. The raid in the north. It was all connecting. The sweep was systematic. They were checking every building in the grid that fit a certain power consumption profile. We're leaving, Avner said. Now. They didn't use the door. They went to the window. They had prepared for this. A rappelling line hidden in the AC unit housing. It was a desperate exit, 4 stories down into a garbage-filled alley. As they descended, the front door of their building was kicked in. They heard the crash of wood, the shouting of voices. The soldiers had arrived. They hit the ground running. Behind them, the sounds of their apartment being torn apart echoed into the night. The house with the radio was no longer a rumor. It was a crime scene. They were now burnt assets, operating in the red. The team stole a car, an old Peugeot taxi, hot wiring it with practiced ease. They drove south, toward the industrial sector where the chemist's convoy was assembling. The city was transforming. Night had fully fallen, turning the capital into a landscape of amber streetlights and deep, impenetrable shadows. The adrenaline of the escape from the apartment was fading, replaced by the icy focus of the mission. They located the warehouse. It was a fortress of corrugated metal and barbed wire. Floodlights cut cones of brilliance through the dusty air. Inside the fence, 3 trucks were idling. Soldiers patrolled the perimeter with AK-47s. "We can't get inside," Eli assessed, watching through binoculars from a ridge 500 meters away. "The perimeter is too tight." "We don't need to get inside," Avner said. "We need to get to the road." The convoy had only one exit route, the southern highway. To get there, they had to pass through a narrow choke point, an underpass beneath the old railway line. "The underpass," Sarah said, realizing the plan. "It's dark. No lights. The trucks will have to slow down for the turn." "Exactly," Avner said. "Eli, you take the mines. I'll create the diversion. Sarah, you drive the getaway." "What diversion?" Sarah asked. Avner pulled a flare gun from the tactical bag. "Something bright." The underpass was a cavern of concrete, graffiti-stained and smelling of urine. Eli positioned himself on the support beams above the road. It was a precarious perch, requiring him to hang suspended in the darkness. The sound of heavy engines approached. The ground vibrated. The convoy was moving. First came a jeep with a mounted machine gun, then the 3 transport trucks, then a rearguard Mercedes. As the lead jeep entered the underpass, slowing for the sharp curve, Avner, positioned on the embankment, fired the flare gun. He didn't aim at the vehicles. He aimed at a pile of dry rubbish and old tires near the tunnel exit. The magnesium flare hit the debris with a blinding flash, instantly igniting a roaring fire. The convoy slammed on its brakes. Panic ensued. The soldiers in the lead jeep shouted, unsure if they were under attack or facing an accident. In that moment of confusion, inside the dark tunnel, Eli dropped. He landed on the canvas roof of the second truck, the one carrying the heaviest load, judging by the suspension. He moved with the fluidity of a cat. He cut a slit in the canvas, verified the crates inside marked with agricultural machinery, the classic cover for weapons, and slapped 2 magnetic mines onto the crates. He set the timers for 30 minutes, long enough for the convoy to clear the city, but short enough to destroy the shipment before it reached the transfer point. He rolled off the back of the truck, hitting the asphalt and rolling into the drainage ditch, just as the rearguard Mercedes screeched to a halt. The soldiers were focused on the fire ahead. They didn't see the shadow disappearing into the drainage pipe. The convoy commander shouted orders. They steered around the burning tires, accelerating out of the trap, believing they had survived a random act of vandalism. They had no idea they were carrying their own destruction. The explosion, when it happened, was a distant thud felt through the floor of the Peugeot taxi as they sped toward the coast. Sarah monitored the military channels. "Detonation confirmed," she said, her voice steady but breathless. "They are reporting a catastrophic accident. Secondary explosions, the guidance systems, the solid fuel, it's all gone." They had succeeded. The shipment was ash. But they were not out yet. Their descriptions would be circulating. Every checkpoint would be looking for 2 men and a woman. They ditched the taxi in a ravine and hiked 5 miles through rough terrain to a prearranged extraction point on the coast, a desolate stretch of beach used by smugglers. The wait was the hardest part, standing in the cold surf, watching the dark horizon, waiting for the signal. The fear returned then, the realization of how close they had come. The signal came at 03 hour. A green light flashing 3 times from the black water. Zodiac boats, manned by Israeli naval commandos, Shayatet 13, emerged from the gloom. Silent, black-clad figures pulled them from the water. As the outboard motors roared to life, pulling them away from the hostile shore, Avner looked back at the receding lights of the city. He thought of the apartment, the brass lamps he never bought, the life they had simulated for 2 years, now gone. And he thought of the child in the market. The boy hadn't known he was saving them. He hadn't known he was changing history. He was just a voice in the crowd, a random variable in the chaotic equation of espionage. Debriefing took place in a windowless room in Tel Aviv. The adrenaline had faded, leaving only exhaustion and the heavy psychological residue of deep cover. The analysts called Operation Glass Spider a strategic success. The guidance systems were destroyed. The chemist was discredited, his reputation ruined by the accident that occurred under his watch. He would likely be purged by his own government for incompetence. But for Avner, Sarah, and Eli, the victory was hollow. They were suffering from the decompression sickness of the soul. They had lived as other people for so long that returning to their own names felt like wearing an ill-fitting suit. Avner sat in a cafe in Tel Aviv a week later. He watched the people walking by, soldiers, mothers, tourists. They walked with an ease he envied, oblivious to the shadow wars fighting for their safety. He saw a child running through the market, laughing, chasing a ball. For a split second, Avner's heart stopped. He heard the phantom echo of a scream. "They found the Safehouse!" He took a sip of coffee, forcing his pulse to slow. The war was over for now. The Safehouse was gone, but the market was everywhere. And somewhere, in another city, another team was building a legend, buying lamps, and waiting for the one chaotic moment that would bring it all crashing down. This is the reality of the Mossad. It is not James Bond. It is not glamour. It is fear, managed by discipline. It is a life lived in the spaces between heartbeats, where a child's shout can sound like a death sentence. If this story of near misses and silent wars kept you on the edge of your seat, please hit the like button. It helps us bring these hidden histories to light. And tell us in the comments, do you think the child in the market was a coincidence? Or was the city itself trying to warn them? Until next time, stay watchful. The shadows are deeper than you think.